Right, guys. Now, before we actually have a look at Abdullah on the bike, I'm just going to go over a little bit of the background of how he was when I first met him. This is the really interesting stuff from a biomechanical perspective. So Abdullah had ridden for quite some time with a pretty sketchy position. He'd been compensating around a seat that was much too high and all this kind of stuff. And he'd been essentially developing further asymmetries in his body, which had gotten to a point of being really critically painful for him. He had severe left-sided ITB and knee pain. His left hip just had like stabbing pains through it when he was riding. He had a severe one-sided saddle sore. And all of this was because Abdullah had basically been compensating by sitting laterally off to the side of the bike, as well as being inclined to the bike. So he was twisted along the longitudinal axis, and he was also laterally shifted to the side. And this had really gotten deep into him. His left glute was much bigger than his right. One of his quads was bigger than the other. And he had a lot of imbalances which had occurred because of all this. The worst part of it was that by the time I got to him last year, his pelvis on the left-hand side had started to posteriorly rotate, and his ilium, the left-hand side of his pelvis, was stuck in a posteriorly rotated position. So from a bike fitting standpoint, this presents a number of serious challenges to his symmetry. Once you start to get an iliac rotation like that, it becomes almost impossible to get the rider to function with a high degree of symmetry. So what we knew from day one was that we'd have a bit of work to do with Abdullah. So I sent him away on day one. I actually made a piece of foam, which I call a persuader, to actually, and we taped it. It was a roll piece of medium density foam, rolled up into a tight bundle. We taped it longitudinally along the length of the seat so that he had an idea of where the middle of the seat was. And we basically got him to centre that rolled piece of foam in the middle of his bum crack so that he wouldn't shift off to the left. And for him, sitting centrally on the seat initially was an incredibly bizarre experience. He was convinced he was actually too far off to the right, which is always the way it is when you've learned to sit off to the side the opposite way. So we got him to ride with the persuader on there for some period of time. I think in the end it was nearly 6 or 8 weeks. And just to regain his idea of centrality on the saddle. This is a pretty severe proprioceptive problem, which doesn't occur very often, but when it does, this trick works really well. And so he came back after a couple of months and he was looking much better. I'd been giving him some one-sided leg strengthening exercises to do, some step-ups and some single leg squats and this kind of stuff, just to try and force his muscle system back into a little bit of reasonable symmetry. And he'd been riding with the persuader in place for that time. And at the same time, obviously, the first time we saw him, we corrected his seat height, we corrected his cleat position, his seat setback, all the important big stuff at the same time, so that he was no longer forced to compensate, and then we were just dealing with the underlying asymmetries which he presented with. So when he came back after that first couple of months, he looked much better. He was sitting mostly in the middle of the seat, he wasn't twisted anymore, and it started to look like he had one leg shorter than the other. Now, I knew this when I first saw him. I was convinced he had a 6mm shorter left leg, I believe it was his left leg, but in the end, after about a year of him riding with really good symmetry, over time, we were able to slowly reduce the height of the shim underneath his left leg. He just slowly became more and more symmetrical. And it turns out that his structural leg length difference, which I perceived to be there when I first met him, was actually completely a functional leg length difference. And that was something that was quite unexpected with him. So he had a 4 or 5mm shim under his left foot, which gradually reduced down to nothing. And he now rides with no leg length shim at all. And I guess the obvious explanation for that is when your pelvis is twisted, he also had a large pelvic tilt, which was down on the left-hand side as part of the muscular compensation strategies which had pulled him out of alignment. Once that starts to go away, you start to be able to see the underlying structural asymmetry in the rider. Turns out he didn't actually have a shorter leg at all, but he certainly did look like he did when I first met him. So his position has evolved a lot over that time. I think it was only about 2 or 3 months ago, which was pretty much 12 months after I first met Abdullah. Only about 2 or 3 months ago that we removed the last of that shim and we finalised the position. So Abdullah's bike position or his bike fit was actually a 12-month process. It was not something that was he just walked in my door and we just solved it and he went away. His problems had gone so deep into the symmetry of his body that it took 12 months to undo it. And Abdullah is not the most asymmetrical client I've ever seen. I've seen many, many, many worse than that have taken longer than that to square themselves up and even themselves back out. So it does present an interesting kind of point to the fitting process. And this is one of those things, this is why if you go and see a competent bike fitter, they should be offering follow-up appointments, which is what I do. Usually after about 12 weeks, we like to see people. But in a case like Abdullah's, I just said to him, look, mate, you're going to be a work in progress for 6 to 12 months. You know, get used to coming in every sort of 3 or 4 months for a fine-tune of the position. And as part of the process when we're fitting people, I don't charge people for those extra hours spent with them. So this is just this is one of the things which I think that all bike fitters should offer, is a follow-up process, because it is inherent in the nature of our game that people are going to change. And if you've got a client coming in who's you're trying to solve a problem for them, and it takes 12 months to solve, you know, that's the name of the game sometimes, is what's got to be done. So he's had a really interesting day here today. He looks fantastic on the bike with his initial position. We're going to then go and see him afterwards at some later point in the future and see how he's going. And hopefully he's got some good news to report. And he's using a power meter and everything now, so he will have some quantifiable metrics to measure his output. But what we're really interested in is basically seeing if he goes any faster or feels more comfortable, or indeed less comfortable, with the more normal, more forward and up over the pedals position that we're about to put him in now. So again, Abdullah's position is pretty symmetrical. He's not dropping one hip forward. You can see from the above down footage, he's nice and square to the bike. A year ago, he was looking pretty messy. Looking at him now, he displays an unusually high degree of symmetry. Most people never get this good. Abdullah's pretty good now, and that's why he has no pain. So a lot of time riding in a really nice symmetrical position, and his body has evened itself right out. So what we'll do now is go through the process of altering his position, and we'll show you some before and after. What we're going to do essentially is we're going to shift his cleat position forward on the shoe. We're going to raise the seat and move it forward, and we're going to potentially maybe think about lowering the front end. And this is all sort of gearing him more towards seeing what he can do over some shorter efforts. Turns out that he's not a bad time trialist, so he's keen to give some TTs a bit of a go and maybe steer clear of the ultra distance stuff for a little while. And a little bit of positional experimentation in this situation is not a bad idea. So we'll see how he goes, and we'll show you some before and after footage of the changes that we've made. You can see that we've created a TT position with an extremely rearward cleat position, as we were talking about. So he ankles very, very flat-footed across the bottom of the stroke, and that's actually on purpose to keep his seat height right down for aerodynamic reasons. His front end is quite relaxed as well. He's got his skis pretty high. A nice rise at the front to stop him creeping forward on the saddle just by blocking his elbows against the pads. He's in nice balance. It doesn't look intolerable. He's got not a lot of drop to the pads, and he's able to sustain this for incredibly long durations, which is, of course, the most important consideration for this type of ultra-distance riding. You have to be able to hold it for a very long time. You'll also notice that his seat is not a long way forward. He has only got slightly more seat set forward than he would if we were setting him up for a road-style position. So he's got a lot of hamstring engagement, a lot of glute involvement across the bottom section of the stroke. And what we're trying to do, of course, is keep his pedal stroke as efficient as possible across the largest duration of crank rotation. We're trying to reduce the spiky torque efforts which come from the traditional TT positions of having the seat up and forward a lot. So he looks pretty good. What we've done here is I've changed nothing on the bike, and I've moved Abdullah's cleats forward on his shoes about 20 millimetres, 25 millimetres. So they're still reasonably rearward, but they're much further forward than they were. And as you can see, his leg extension looks kind of comical. He looks like he's now sitting way too low. He's hardly extending his knee through the bottom of the stroke, and he feels like he's riding a kid's bike. So now we're going to go through the process of lifting the seat. We're going to move it a little bit further forward and turn this into a little bit more of a traditional TT style position. See how he goes. I've now raised his seat about 20 millimetres and moved it forward about 15. I haven't altered his front end because it still looks pretty good. You can see his pedal stroke looks much more normal. He's ankling very differently to what you saw when his cleats were back much further under the foot. So his ankling has gone from being incredibly flat-footed to a little bit more of a normal kind of slightly toe-down position with a little bit more rigidity in his ankling. So this is now a kind of position that I would use for a club race time trial style thing, someone who's doing an effort that's sort of an hour or less. If you were doing, say, a 70.3 try or even out to an Ironman, this would also be quite comfortable. Going out to those really ultra long distance, super long intensities, that's where you might want to think about creeping those cleats further back like we did with Abdullah, and we used a set of extender plates to make that happen for him. We had his cleats 55 millimetres behind the ball of his foot. Now we've got them about 20 to 25 millimetres behind the ball of his foot, which is a much more normal cleat position. He looks really good. He just basically looks normal. His symmetry on the bike actually looks ever so slightly better, and it doesn't look like it's doing him any harm whatsoever. So Abdullah's going to ride like this for a while and just see what happens. This is an experiment. We don't know if he's going to go better or worse. I've told him that he's probably going to go better over short to medium distances, but the long distances, ultra long distances, may suffer. So we'll see how it pans out, and hopefully we can get him some kind of a happy medium and see how he goes on lots of different styles of time trial. Thanks guys, and we'll see how he goes in the future.